It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are doing a twofer because they're both novellas, united in that they're both vaguely Wizards versus Lesbian-y, in one case extremely Wizards versus Lesbian-y, but more to the point, they both have tiger in their names, and they're also fantasy East Asia settings.
Yes. Well, one of them is more of a fantasy Southeast Asia setting.
Fair enough.
Look, they have different buildings on campus.
I'm not going to dispute any of this. So we are doing Aliette de Bodard's FIREHEART Tiger, and we are doing When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, which is the second novella in the Singing Hills cycle by Nghi Vo.
Correct.
We will do plot summaries for both of them, I imagine. I think this is the way that we did with the short stories, right? And then just head into the spoiler zone for both?
I think that, yes.
Okay.
With the usual questions of, does this have wizards, does this have lesbians?
Yes. Okay. So starting with FIREHEART Tiger, let's say, would you like to do the plot or shall I?
Why don't you?
Okay, so this is a bit of a court drama. The youngest daughter of the queen of fantasy Vietnam, essentially, or, close to Southeast Asia, somewhere in the Southeast Asia building, is assisting her mother in negotiations with the northern kingdom of fantasy Europe, who's busily colonizing them. And is demanding things like free ports. But twist number one, the daughter of the queen of Europe,
France. It's fantasy France.
In France, is, I mean, it could be anywhere, but because it's Vietnam, this is France.
Right.
The French daughter and the Vietnamese, the French princess and the Vietnamese princess are having an affair. Or had an affair when the Vietnamese princess was sent to the French court as a child. And the French princess wants to continue this. And also there's a fire spirit, which is the reason that the Vietnamese princess had to leave precipitously. And so the Vietnamese princess has to figure out her feelings about the French princess, about the state of her imminently colonized nation in general, and about the fire elemental spirit that she's been carrying around unbeknownst to her. Does that cover it?
Yeah, I think that covers it.
Cool. Are there wizards?
No, but there's a fire elemental.
Yeah, there's an empire.
There's an empire and there's a fire elemental, and they're actually opposed, but
Yeah, this is very reminiscent of the problematic lesbian relationship between the colonizer and the colonizee books that we've already done, right down to the sort of the idea of native magic being opposed to the colonizing influence.
Yep, we can get more into that.
Indeed. Okay, why should you read it?
It's short. I think the relationship depictions are pretty good. This is probably my least favorite thing by this author. This is an author that I like, but
interesting.
It's fine. It's fine. It's not bad. It's just that I think less interesting than a lot of her other stuff.
It is very thematically straightforward, put it that way, and definitely covers ground that has already been covered in other books. But it has the advantage over all the other books that have covered this ground that we've done of being very short.
And the writing itself, I think, is quite good.
Oh yeah, so. Yeah, and it's entirely competently written and constructed. I certainly didn't mind reading this at all.
Isaac, you sound really dismissive when you say that, but when we look back at a lot of the books we've covered, this is actually pretty high praise.
I mean, yes, please be sure that I don't say that. I couldn't say that out of the majority of the books that we've done.
Right.
So I'm not trying to be dismissive by saying that. That's actually a big thumbs up for me. And I apologize if it comes off as anything else. And why shouldn't you read it? Or did you just cover that?
I gotta say, like, I feel like it's trying, it has many of the same problems as, I feel like underlying thematic problems as The Unbroken, which is to say that, there comes a point where you're trying so hard to be anti-colonialist that you end up sort of leaning into but the good old days of our empires were great.
Yeah, no, I mean, it has the same problems that The Unbroken does.
And like, I actually know a lot about the legal code of the Vietnamese Empire because it's very, very, very closely based on the legal code of the Qing Empire. And like, it's not a legal code I'd want to live under.
Yes.
It was more progressive than like the legal code of England at that time, but like still.
Indeed.
And it also has the problem of and it has a lot of the same issues with, wanting to have it both ways with sort of progressive social politics, but, still having a hereditary monarchy.
Yes. Which this novella solves by just making the whole thing a matriarchy for everybody.
Right.
There are, I think, no men in this book. In this novella.
I think you're correct. Yes.
Yeah.
That had not even occurred to me.
Yeah. It's the same range of characters that you would expect, just none of them are men. So let's move on to When the Tiger Came Down on the Mountain. I guess content warnings, bad mom, abusive relationship dynamics.
Yeah, domestic violence.
Arson.
Fire, yeah, arson.
When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nghi Vo. You or I should do this.
I will do this.
Okay.
Oh shoot, I've forgotten the monk's name.
Chi, or G, or CHIH.
Chur.
Chur.
I assumed it was Chur because I feel like everybody's names are using
the audiobook reader
Wade Giles.
Pronounced it G.
I'm just saying CHIH and Wade Giles is Chur. So I always pronounce the monk's name Chur.
We're back on systems of romanization. Wade Giles is an old-fashioned one. HSIEH in this ridiculous setup is pronounced Shia. It's been replaced by the far more modern and useful pinyin. And in that one, XIE is pronounced Shia. Obviously, we should just use Guayu romance.
Sure, the monk, the non-binary story monk who goes around collecting histories, who goes around fantasy Chinese empire collecting histories of important events, is often basically kind of like fantasy Mongolia, except with mammoths. When they and their local guide get stranded in a cave with a bunch of hungry tigers. And to convince the tigers, to dissuade the tigers from attempting to eat them, they and the tigers compare notes on a love story that's important in both of their cultures. A romance between a woman scholar and a tiger.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, that pretty much covers it. This is part of a sort of episodic series, which hopefully there will be more installments of because I like it. And It reminds me a lot of Kino no Tabi.
It does, you're right.
We got the hoopoe bird, who is the monk's companion, does not show up in this particular installment.
But it's very much like the motorcycle.
Kino's journey was a series of light novels that's been made into a couple of anime. And if you think that Gulliver's Travels, except with a ace butch woman who's a sharpshooter and her talking motorcycle, if that sounds good to you, check out the first anime, but very much not the second. But exactly, it's very much like the motorcycle. The sort of they-them AFAB protagonist. Do
we actually know that Chur is AFAB?
They were mistaken for a girl by the first person who saw them in the first book. That may not mean anything. So we don't know for sure. But
my little brother used to get mistaken for a girl all the time. And
true.
You've been mistaken for a girl.
Who
Only in
hasn't really?
photos.
Not recently, I will say. Uh, and but yeah, no, this is all is sort of, 1001 nights. We got to keep the story going until the cavalry can arrive. In this case,
So why should you read this? Oh wait, first, are there wizards? No, but there's
no,
tigers.
yeah, tigers are
There's
magic.
tigers. There's tigers and there's magic.
Really, this
There's
episode
magical
is not
tigers.
particularly wizards versus lesbians, either of them.
I just really like. Yeah, no, but I think that they both touch on the themes that we're covering that we discussed in the podcast, and they do have they feature lesbian relationships and magic and questions of empire. So
Yep. The big deal, yeah. But anyway, we can come back to this one.
but there are lesbians.
There are lesbians, yes.
There are no wizards, but there are lesbians.
Yeah.
And well, the lesbians in the tigers fight.
That they do.
Are in conflict, even if they eventually actually. Well, there's an interesting theme with both of these, where both of them, the closest thing to a wizard figure is also the romantic, is also the love interest for the lesbian protagonist.
Yes, indeed. Although in very different ways.
In very different ways. So why should you read this book, other than because it's short and delightful?
I mean, what more do you need, really? It's like, I mean, if you like that sort of Kino no Tabi style, or that
Plus,
Kino's Journey, if that's a reference that anybody gets anymore. And I'm talking about the original, not the remake.
Yeah, the remake's not very good.
Yeah, there's just sort of a wanderer who is, and actually, it also reminds me of another one that we did, which wasn't actually Wizards versus Lesbians, which was the Steerswoman books.
Yes.
Except because the hero is a traveling story collector /
yeah, the story monks are very
/
similar to Steerswomen in some ways.
Yeah, we like an academic as the hero.
Yes, we do. But like but on top of that, this one has because this is a history monk. One of the things I really like about both installments, but in particular this one, is that it's about the way that you can have different versions of stories based on who's telling them, and it doesn't treat either version as inherently more valid. It's stories and history can change and evolve, and I really like the way that everybody's experiencing and discussing the different versions of the story.
Yes, I would also say that one of the particular strengths of this book and this series is that the world building is really, really good. Like
it is, like it's very much as sort of as a historian of the Chinese Empire, it feels very sort of rooted in that, but also really distinct.
Yes, it doesn't feel like it's not. This is like fantasy China / fantasy Mongolia, but the Mongolia almost feels even more northern than
it does. Yeah,
and like it's
the Mammoth people are more like the reindeer people.
Right.
Right. This reads like somebody's really studied the history of East Asia and North and Central Asia, and then written and then like built a world informed by that knowledge. But this is very much not, even though I summarized it that way earlier, it's very much not just fantasy China.
Yes, exactly. Which I appreciate it. It's significantly less one-to-one than FIREHEART Tiger.
Yes, or the Unbroken.
Or the Unbroken, or any of those. But then again, this is not part of that colonial genre. Right. This is about two empires fighting each other, and both doing unpleasant things as empires do when they fight each other. Because it's from a historian's perspective, and the historian stands outside and watches two empires struggle against each other.
Right.
Why shouldn't you read it?
I don't know. You don't like this sort of thing, I guess?
I mean, I think that probably for this one and the other one, the major complaint that I would imagine is that nothing much happens.
Well, nothing much happens in the framing story, but a fair amount happens in the tiger romance.
Yeah, it's you have to be prepared to be like, okay, this is, for the most part, this is going to be a story in which we sit down and people tell stories to each other. And
Yeah,
if you're not down for that, then you're
that's
probably
fair.
not going to like it. But
That's fair. This is so much my jam that it's hard to,
yes.
be entirely, um, entirely impartial. But like, yeah, I guess if everything we've said so far sounds boring to you, then
You may
I
be
guess
bored by
don't read
this.
this. Though again, it's short
Very,
enough that.
very short. So you're not losing a lot of time. Um,
Also, I gotta say, I really like Nghi Vo's writing. Um,
yes, her prose. I would above average even, says Isaac. Uh,
I mean, she wrote an extremely strange queer fantasy retelling of The Great Gatsby. Clearly, somebody who's saw that challenge somebody put on Tumblr a while ago, being like, "The Great Gatsby is about to go public domain. I want everybody's wacky AU fanfics ready for publication." Um, and even that, which I was not my favorite thing by her, I still, was still very well written.
yes. Um, would that be The Chosen and the Beautiful?
It would be The Chosen and the
That's a
Beautiful.
hell of a thing to do for your debut novel.
She by and large appears to have pulled it off, and that it's gotten very good reviews and praise, and um, and even the people like me who just aren't that invested in The Great Gatsby are like, well, the writing was really good. It's just I'm not that interested in The Great Gatsby.
Okay.
All right.
Shall we then move on to whatever we haven't discussed
Yeah. Are there any?
so far?
There's some slightly weird consent stuff in the inner story about the Lady and the Tiger. So I guess that's it for content warnings,
Mm.
unless you're scared of tigers.
Yeah, just about. Oh my God! Actually, one of those weird consent moments leads to my favorite thing in either of these books, and I will tell you what that is on the other side of the spoiler zone
All
right now.
right.
Oh, this episode is a little snake bit. We were both a little too tired for it. There's not enough meat on these two books' bones. But let's go off to the spoiler zone. My favorite thing in either of these novellas is that when the monk within the story, or the scholar woman rather within the story, in The Tiger Came Down the Mountain, has accidentally got herself captured by, depending on which version of the story you believe, some ghosts or some foxes, and she is led to the bedroom of the handsome young son of the family, ghost or fox, to whom she has been allowed herself to be betrothed by eating enchanted snacks. The veil is torn, and she catches a glimpse of what the bed actually is, which is an open grave, and she thinks distantly, "Oh, I'm going to have to be on top." Which is one of the best jokes I've encountered in this whole series, and like, I didn't expect to encounter it in this book. The tone of this book is not like super joke heavy, but there are one or two really funny little bits. Speaking of which, I really enjoyed the relationship between the Tiger's siblings. Which it was just so very sibling.
It was,
in addition
and
to
I
being terrifying tigers, they're also quibbling siblings.
Right, which I think did a good job of also sort of establishing it makes the romance in either version work a little bit better, because you can see these tigers who are not transforming into humans. You can see just how human they are. So it makes it easier to believe in the romance between this, shy, nerdy scholar and this, like, butch tiger lesbian.
Yes, indeed. Although I think that I was largely confused about the tigers at the end of the day here, which may just be because, as in the other book that we are talking about here, the French are the French, and that's pretty clear, and it's like they're the bad guys. The tigers are definitely the antagonists here, but
the tigers are the heroic bandits of, like, the Chinese literary tradition.
okay. So yeah, no, fill that in for me. So it's like they have a moral code, but it's a moral code which definitely allows them to eat people. But they still
Right.
have a moral code.
Right. I mean, this is very much so. I mean, the tigers are very much like the sort of bandits of the again of like the Chinese literary tradition, which is like for example in Outlaws of the Marsh slash Water Margin slash Suikoden slash Shui Huchuan, whatever you want to call it, which is all about sort of these rough men who do terrible things, but they also do have a real code of honor and like the bonds of brotherhood.
Right. So this is just like pirate literature in the Western tradition, or
Right. This is very much like pirate literature in the Western tradition.
boy, do we love our charming roads, our pirates and our ninjas and our mafiosos. We like to imagine they had honor codes, when really they were a bunch of murderous thugs.
Except that, the thing is that bandits. The thing is that because the imperial state would label, you really had, especially local government, had a lot invested in labeling uprisings banditry, because one of these things is a manageable problem, and one of these things will get you promptly fired. And so, there's this thing where bandits can be this sort of voice of the voiceless and protest, and sometimes are the only the only thing that can can do something about the tyrannical local magistrate or prefect. But at the same time, but actual bandits were mostly extremely predatory, and the Chinese literature kind of acknowledges that. Like, the bandits don't tend to be nice people. There's a moment in Outlaws of the Marsh where one of the guys is supposed to like go and take some hostages or whatever, and he just kills everyone. And then everyone is like, why? What? And he's like, if you didn't want me to kill everyone, why did you send me in there?
Yes. Yeah, that
so that's like, that's the tigers, right? Like,
right.
They're wild and free, and and they can be a little bit sexy, but also they're still extremely dangerous, and because you are outside of their group, they unless you have some sort of kinship or relationship claim on them, they have absolutely no compunction about killing you. And I mean, even like the way that they're sort of preying on travelers is a very sort of bandit-y thing to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That helps a lot actually, because I was sort of a little bit confused at the end of this one. The sort of the note that it ends on is folks being a little bit sad and wistful about the fact that these tigers will probably be driven from this area, and will end up hung up outside some city wall, and that like totally jives with the sort of bittersweet feeling about the quote unquote civilization of outlaw areas.
Right, exactly.
In the like the upswings of new empire and civilization, which we're sort
Right.
of in this book at this moment.
Yes, and of course, because they're tigers, we as modern readers who, care about things like endangered species can sort of buy into that romance in a way that we probably couldn't as modern readers reading about bandits. I mean, we could, but then we'd feel slightly bad about romanticizing bandits. It's a little bit easier, I think, to romanticize tigers.
Yeah, and also like it's cool. I mean,
Right.
right, like
They're magical talking
magical
tigers.
talking tiger girlfriend. It's a pretty solid concept.
Right, yes. Like you can definitely see. I mean, one of the things I do like about this is that even though the tiger girlfriend is tiger wife, I guess actually is utterly terrifying. I feel like both sides do a pretty good job of selling you on how terrifying she's supposed to be. But like, you can also see why, when it comes down to it, the scholar, that like why the scholar first of all would prefer her to either the foxes or the ghosts. Why the scholar hooks up with her in the first place, but then also why, when the scholar is like shown up to take the Imperial Civil Service exam, she looks at academia and government service and says, "No, fuck this. I want my hot tiger girlfriend. I will live in the caves and be
Yeah,
married
right.
to."
It is more sort of diametric opposition that might be immediately clear. Um, And yeah, no, there's a sort of a very like universally relatable story sort of enchiladed into here about somebody who's been raised to have a single ambition and the difficulty with derailing yourself from that path. Um,
And this is
Even
one
when
of the
it's
reasons why I put it on the thing, because it has queer desire as the liberating force.
yes, it certainly does. You know, it's like I don't think that it in this case like I mean, unless you want to call Desire for a Tiger queer, you know, full stop.
Well, they are also both women.
I mean, they are both women, but that's also like that's not a problem in this version
That's
of
not a problem.
history.
But this is something that we've observed a lot in these stories is that a lot of people want to write settings that are free of homophobia. So they have to make up other in-setting reasons for why so that the relationship can still have the like revolutionary queer desire thing,
Yeah,
but in a world without homophobia. And I mean, if you're a scholar who's supposed to be doing the civil service exam, a bandit who's also a tiger is like definitely not an acceptable spouse.
yeah, no, 100%. Like, I mean, we've already had this conversation, but in case you know, in case you're a new viewer tuning in, one of the major wizards versus lesbian themes is that these books like to posit um, queer romance slash forbidden romance, and we get further elsewhere into the distinction there as the way to get out of your um, the way to get out of your cage, which is actually a relatively decent segue into the other book and the way
Right.
that
Though
it treats that.
I want to follow this up because this also sets up what I think is an interesting contrast between the two books.
Yes, exactly.
Because I feel like the core wizards versus lesbians theme is that queer desire is the way to get out of your personal cage, and this leads to the breaking of empires as, because the sort of liberation starts with the individual and it spreads to society, which is actually weirdly Confucian.
It's an
But
idea that is popular with the kids these days, I think.
yes, yes, and we both point out that we're not necessarily sure we agree with this, but I think that it's
We
an
are
interesting
older
running
and
theme
more
in these
cynical.
books.
Yes.
Yes, yes, we are. But this is an interesting running theme in these books is that that like queerness and queerness usually, which is usually sort of realized through experiencing desire or love, whether requited or not, becomes this force that leads first to personal liberation and then to the breaking of empires.
Yes.
And so this book, I mean, it doesn't lead to the breaking of empires, but this story in both versions, this is a story that's an anti-imperial story. This is a story about turning your back on your, sacred Confucian duty to do well by your family and enter the civil service exam and serve your empire, and prove your merit and like rise in the meritocracy. And it's throwing all that away for love and also like banditry, which is the thing that is again strongly linked with uprisings. And I think it is not coincidental that this story is not something that Chur knows. It's being told by the tigers, who are the bandits, and it's being told by this minority inside the empire who has a reputation, who's for having been difficult to conquer and prone to rebellion. This is an anti-imperial story, whether it's told from the bandits' perspective or the colonized subjects' perspective.
Yeah, the Mammoth Guards in this
Yes,
case,
who I love the Mammoth Guards.
Incidentally a member of the currently ascendant empire, but until recently were difficult to quell subjects of the Southern Empire.
Yes, there are Mongols / Manchus.
There's definitely it's definitely mentioned that they are still a bit on the outs, like not 100% trusted even by their own government. That's certainly implied.
Yep. I think it's more than implied because there's still certain rules about like, the Mammoth Riders can't, be in the civil service within a few generations and stuff like that.
They're viewed as a troublesome potential alternate locus for power to coalesce around.
Right.
So yes, as you know, it is ever thus with an empire and its armies. But
Right. But I like that because, this is a story about stories and a story about history. And I really like that this is, that this is, if you just read between the lines just a tiny bit, this is also a story about the ways that, stories get used to question and undermine empire.
yes, now, now that's the revolutionary moment, we say to ourselves smugly as fans and writers of fiction. Um,
And editors.
and editors, yes.
So, and that is, I think, a good segue too.
Yes, because there are two potential queer romances in Fireheart Tiger. There is the forbidden romance between. Do you remember her name? I don't remember her name.
Well, Tan is the prince, is our Vietnamese princess. I think Eldris is the.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Eldris is the French princess, and Yang is the
Yes.
is the tiger.
So there's the forbidden relationship between Tan and Eldris, which is obviously forbidden because one of them is Vietnamese and one of them is French, and they're both princesses. And then and she feels a lot of feelings about that relationship, which feel liberatory. For example, it's one way for her to get out from under the thumb of her abusive, domineering mother.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not sufficient. Forbidden romance in and of itself is not sufficient because you might fall in love with the colonizer. And the line is very heavily drawn here between the abusive relationship between a colonizing country and a country which it is eroding via, soft and hard power, and treaty ports and such, and extraterritoriality. Very historical, this. And the standard dynamics of an abusive romantic relationship wherein one party has all of the power. And it's very sweet right up until the point where it isn't. Which
is basically right up to the point where she says,
where she wants to do something else,
where she wants something of her own,
right? As long as she's willing to go along and be a companion and plaything, everything is great. They will France will make the ruling class of its conquered nations rich and happy as long as they don't try to govern or protect their nation's resources or anything like that. But then she feels happy about this relationship initially because it feels right and it offers a particular kind of liberation. But it turns out that queer desire in and of itself isn't the revolutionary moment here. It has to be super queer desire, where the object of her desire is also a girl, but is also a magic girl, and very specifically a specifically Vietnamese spirit.
Tiger fire elemental.
Yes. So she needs to learn to train her forbidden queer desire on her own country and her own people, and not look outside for it, because only then will she be able to make common cause with the Cambodians. Question mark.
These may be. I mean, Vietnam has historically not always been one single country. These may be
bits and pieces of what is currently called Vietnam. Yes. The ebook that I was working from gave up on the characters eventually, and I started getting things like omega symbols as part of the names of these nations. So they're just diacritics, guys. I know, but it was doing okay for a minute, and then it got overwhelmed.
I see.
Cyrillic characters, I think, were in there, but anyway. So yeah, same problem with this, I feel, is that there tends to be with all of these nationalist magic stories that we've done.
Right, which is that they end up being, the anti-colonial story is great, and I think that this one by talking about the specifically the colonialism of artifact theft and display is like, I think, a particularly good well done metaphor. But at the same time, it's like, you know what? It's the problem isn't kingdoms. It's just, Western kingdoms. Our kingdoms, great.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it goes that far because like it doesn't shy away from how shitty her mom is.
Sort of, except that then her mom steps up in the end and defends her. And it sort of ends on this very sort of positive note of maybe she underestimated her mother. Maybe her mother cares more about her than she thought.
I mean, I think that's one way to read it. But I
I'm
think
perhaps
that,
being a little bit harsh.
yeah, I think that it's more like she's successfully manipulated her mother into having to give her what she wants in this specific instance.
I don't know. The fact that it says stuff like mother's voice is sharp but not unkind when she introduces her fire elemental girlfriend to her mother.
Yeah.
No. That, like the whole sharp but not unkind is the thing that's.
Yeah, I agree. No, I mean, I think that like it's tempting to read it as being almost exactly the same story as The Unbroken, or the other sub unbroken likes that we've discussed. But yeah, and the part of the way that it gets away with it is that it is in fact shorter and doesn't get as far into the implications of this worldview. I mean, we never leave the imperial palace. We never speak to a commoner.
Right. The one person who she thinks is a commoner, who like held her hands when they were running out of the, dormitory or whatever that was on fire, the palace that's on fire, is actually a magical fire elemental.
Right. But are we meant to are we meant to read her relationship with said fire elemental as a relationship with a commoner?
No, not at all. That's the thing. It's like the one person who, she thinks is a commoner is secretly revealed to actually not be a commoner.
Yeah. It's a very, very narrow viewpoint. And it also despite all of the sort of diplomatic talk and the various names of nations and the commodities that are discussed flowing from various places in trade, the world building in this one actually feels oddly impoverished. Not a lot of attention is paid to what things look like or feel like or smell like or taste like.
Right.
This book is very much a book of ideas.
Yeah, and which is again part of what I find a little bit sort of disappointing, because I've read a lot of stuff by this author. She mostly writes she writes novels and novellas, some of which are about fallen angels in Paris and also Vietnamese magical elementals, also in Paris, extremely gay. And the others are Vietnam Space Empire, Confucian officials with
that sounds
with brain ships, and
yeah.
she has one that's loosely inspired by Dream of the Third Chamber. It's great, and part of the thing is that those are much more. I mean, they still aren't super strong on the sensory stuff. The Paris books are better at that, but they're much more showing how this society, the real problems with an empire.
Yeah, I agree. I want to read the Vietnamese Space Empire books. Those sound like a lot of fun.
They're a little depressing because,
yes.
but I enjoy them.
Mm-hmm. I'd just like to take this opportunity to recommend a book about. It's not sci-fi, but it's about the colonial French Vietnamese relationship. It's called The Book of Salt, which is about a Vietnamese cook who, in the early 20th century, who goes to France and is employed as the chef of Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, So in fact, it also has lesbians. Um,
I'd read that.
it's really good. I recommend it. Um, uh, Many of the same issues come up, but it also is
mm-hmm.
really focused on food, and you know,
Which is
and
definitely
it's a big
which is
part of the
definitely a
colonial
thing.
relationship between France and Vietnam.
Right, and I feel like that's a real thing that is missing from this book is that you have this girl who is basically a hostage and raised so that she can be acculturated into French culture, and then sent back as an adult with the hopes that she'll be sympathetic to her kidnapper, which again very much like The Unbroken, um, and which also again just because it's like The Unbroken doesn't mean it's bad. And that either book is bad.
Yeah,
It's just an interesting
I didn't
thematic.
dislike The Unbroken.
I know you didn't.
I
Neither
just,
did I.
you know,
I know. I just.
it's just the
What I'm
ideas in
trying to
it.
say is right. Well, and what I'm trying to say is that this is not pointing out the similarities. Isn't trying to call either one of these derivative. It's just clearly this is something that's in the zeitgeist right now.
It's in the zeitgeist now. It's in the zeitgeist now. Well, you've read it once or twice, or 42 or 43 times. It's in the zeitgeist now. Ole, ole, ole.
But one of the things is that you have this girl who's sort of has grown up suffering culture shock in both directions, and you don't get any you're missing a lot of her memories of magical France are not particularly you just don't get a sense of how they're different other than that inherent obviously we want to sympathize with the colonized or the potentially colonized over the colonizers, but there's no sense of what life is like in either of these. Her sensory impression of France is just snow. The princess tastes like snow when they kiss.
There isn't really a sense of the vagueness comes into it, like how far apart are these nations? Like what does it? How does? Well, you don't really need to get into that in a book this size, but I could have done with a little bit more. I could have done with a little bit more flavor, as it were, here. I think this book, as loath as I am to say it, could have stood to be a little bit longer and developed its ideas a little bit more. It is not as successful in its self-contained storytelling as the other Tiger book,
yeah,
in my opinion.
And and like part of this is just that I have a strong anti-monarchy bias, and so.
Oh yeah, but no, I mean, I think that there's also just sort of we can judge these books on whether we personally agree or disagree with the ideological content therein, which is what the now largely abandoned Grumpy Zone was supposed to be about. But but also it's like just in turn, you can also put our editor hats on, or
right, and
like,
and that like this is, and as you said, this is very much a book of ideas, but it's hard to make your ideas work if you're not grounding them in humanness.
Yes.
And I think that this book is lacking in a little bit of that grounding.
Yeah. Like I would, it would have been nice to have some, shades of gradation in the abusive relationship beyond,
beyond like the
awesome,
princess
awesome,
loves her,
awesome,
the princess
terrible,
letter, the princess
yeah,
loves her,
right.
then I mean, then again, like that is actually sometimes how abusive relationships work.
Yeah, no, that is true.
Especially in a book this long, and you see, I mean, I felt like that was pretty well foreshadowed, because you can see the ways that Tan is sort of constantly trying. Well, not just expected it in terms of obviously this is how the story is going to turn out, but like the ways in which Tan, when they had this sort of first casual fling back in France, Tan calls it off first because she's afraid that the other other princess is going to get bored, and the way that she's like so nervous and careful while the other princess is just like, we're getting married.
Yeah,
like rushing her. The whole pattern of rushing her into a commitment that she's not ready to make, and then flipping out and turning terrifying and violent, as soon as she shows any sign of reluctance on that. I actually thought that was pretty well depicted.
Yeah, that's true. And there's also like the element of one of the things that felt the most true to life was like the way that even while Tan is allowing herself to be, attracted to slash infatuated with the French princess, her major reaction to seeing her is fear. Like,
Yes, exactly.
the sort of, it's like, it's a scary, exciting, sexy fear.
But it's
but
still
it's still
fear all the way through.
Right, exactly.
And because also, I mean, and this is actually where the book's lack of subtlety helps, in terms of helping you understand their interpersonal relationship, is that because the power differential is so clear, you can tell that this fear is really justified. That Tan really just is never given an opportunity to say no.
Yeah, that is definitely the case.
Both sort of because the princess steamrolls her, but also because of their relative countries.
Yeah, and there's
power.
If you want to compare it to the Unbroken again, and the Unbroken, the I of course don't remember any names, but
Luca and Terrain.
Terrain, thank you. That's very impressive that you remember that.
I don't know.
But Terrain instantly understands all of the power dynamics and has to explain them to Luca, and that doesn't tend to be how these things shake out. And so it is nice to sort of be in a position where or to see this character like having to figure this all out on the fly, while she's feeling a whole bunch of things from a whole bunch of different directions at once.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, while I'm grumpy about about some of the sort of the politics and the part of the message that isn't just anti-colonialist, I do think that the interpersonal stuff, especially for a book this short, is really well done.
Yeah, no, I'm willing to accept that.
And also, like, the other thing, the way that the fire elemental is just constantly being like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" Works both as a good contrast to the princess, who has never bothered to check if anyone else is okay in her life, as far as I can tell, but also is the sort of thing that people do when somebody they care about is in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't like the pro-monarchy thing, and I don't like the sudden backtracking on the terrible mother.
Yeah, and I like that they were, there was at least some note being made here about, I'm not entirely sure that I'm in love with this fire elemental that I just met.
Right. Yeah, that was also good. Like, I mean, good. Like, that was some good character growth for Tan, who is starting to learn that, she can, and in this relationship actually has enough power that she can slow things down and take her time. And that's, and I did like that. I really did like the sort of moment, the bonding moment that they have, which is that they both have been, put on display.
Yes.
That's, that like, it's not just that, they're used to being, they were the only two Vietnamese people in the French palace. But also that, like, they have this specific, that because of her elite status, and in Gyang's case, because she has, been literally objectified, but that does a nice job. And in this way, actually, Gyang is a little bit of a commoner, because that does a nice job of evoking all of the, like, horrible World's Fair stuff where they would just truck in random people from, non-white countries and be like, look, human zoo.
Right, exactly.
So sort of drawing the line between that and between the way that the children of the elite in colonized countries also get put on display, and also things like residential schools, sort of that there's one thing that, regardless of privilege, people in a certain colonized relationship, people who've been colonized in certain ways can have, which is that no matter how elite you are, you can still be taken away, forced to attempt to assimilate, even though you never can fully assimilate, and treated like this, museum display piece.
Yeah. And I suppose it is to be praised that it manages to cram a pretty good sense of that feeling into such a small space.
Right.
I look at 10 and I think, yep, double consciousness is occurring in this character, and it's been induced from without. What do you get when you're an elite? But there's an elite that is eliter. Their guns are bigger and their cash is sweeter. That's when you sell your country out.
Right, and she doesn't she doesn't just feel like she's here just to like demonstrate double consciousness. Like she comes off as a person.
Yeah.
As much as somebody in this short a piece can do.
Yeah, and very competent.
I'm not entirely sure anyone else in this book comes off entirely as a person.
Well, they're not really supposed to, are they?
But Tan does, and to a lesser degree, her mother does, just not one I like.
And the Frenchmen, the French women are who would be Frenchmen in
yes,
are cartoon villains, but of course they are. And Yang doesn't really get enough screen time for us to know anything about her beyond that she's scared.
My entire memory of Yang before rereading this before the podcast was just like she says sis a lot.
Yeah, a little weird given.
Well, I mean, that's just this is a thing that I like about Aliette Baudard's work, perhaps because you also see it in Chinese, which is I like that she refuses to completely localize the family relationships as sort of non-family interpersonal titles.
Yeah, and like it's actually sort of an interesting thing. It's like I feel like anybody who was raised on clumsy fan translations of manga or anime will immediately just file that into the right place in their brain, but it might be a little bit odd for those who don't have that experience.
Right, but honestly, I think that's a kind of oddness that works perfectly well with the kind of writing that she's doing, and also whatever, like people can deal.
Casual segue to the end. Do we have any final thoughts or final gripes about either of these books?
No, I mean, even though I definitely like Tiger Came Down the Mountain better, and had some gripes about Fireheart Tiger, I like both of these quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I had a much easier week this week than I did over the last 2 weeks with
Amatka, which is good but difficult, and then that's right, and then Last Exit.
Right.
So last 2 weeks, I was thinking in terms of podcast units, and instead of weeks that pass.
Yeah, weeks that I had to spend with given.
That's right. I forgot that Last Exit was a 2-weeker.
Oh boy, was it ever!
But no, I think both of these are quite good, and I feel like there's a lot of there's just been a lot of good queer, mostly lesbian, or Wulu fiction that is drawing on East and Southeast Asia literature and history, and obviously I am all for it. And people, keep writing it, guys. It's great.
I have nothing to add to that. Wait, it's pronounced Wulu? I read the first installment of Nghi Vo's series on my own recognizance, and will continue to read them as they go out in little friendly Murderbot style chunks. And I'm looking forward to following up with those. I mean, the Fireheart Tiger was, fine. But I was really charmed by Nghi Vo's writing style, and particularly the little flashes of humor in there. And I look forward to more of those. And I will probably look up the Gatsby book as well if I have a spare moment to do that. I would certainly be interested in discussing it with you. It does not have lesbians, though, and the main character is bi. But so we couldn't do it for the podcast, but I would certainly be interested to hear what you think about it. Cool. I'll snaffle it then.
All right. And we're about to discuss what's going to come up next. So, we will not tell you guys yet. You'll just have to wait and see.
All right. Next week, something to be determined based upon a conversation that we're about to have. A little short episode this time, but they were short books.
They were
So
short books.
makes sense.
All right. Thank you guys for listening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.